So, what I'm going to talk about today is what I basically spent my PhD years worrying about, obsessing over, and more kind of losing all faith in the concept of binaries, both in astronomy and in other places. This talk is mostly going to be astronomy, but there is a strong component of gender throughout. So, an undercurrent of gender. So let's start with what do we actually mean by binarity? Oh no, wait, this is the contents of the talk. I did it like this so the talk seems short, so that I don't get shouted at for talking too long. Firstly, what is binarity in astronomy and in other things? How do we go about finding binaries? And are binaries actually binary? And my hope is that by the end of this talk you'll have lost all faith in astronomical binaries and maybe some other binaries along the way. I'll click with the stop clicking. So in general, if you ask anyone who isn't an astronomer what a binary is, they might say something like, if I'm really struggling with this, oh, I've got a point here. That didn't work. Okay, they might say something like this. This is the definition of, in fact, is this Wiktionary? The Wikipedia dictionary. It's very hard to say. Try it in your own time. I think this is a really wonderful definition. A binary, or binarity, is a representation of something as a pair or set of oppositions. I love this particularly because of the inclusion of the word representation, and we'll get a bit to why that is. So a really classic example. It takes like 3 clicks. Really classic example is a coin, heads and tails. Another good example is the binary between legal and illegal. So this image on the bottom is some friends and comrades of mine having a police water cannon fired at them for blocking the A12 in Den Haag to protest climate inaction. But binaries, I'd argue, kind of almost in general can start to break down. Often by doing illegal things, we can make things legal. This is a very on-the-nose example. This is Rosa Parks, bus boycotts in Alabama, by illegally occupying spaces that made segregated spaces, sparked motion to desegregate them. Even things like the coin are actually quite a false binary. We call these heads and tails, but both of these sides have a head on them, and neither of them have a tail on them. Even more so, as a physical object, as an object of value, the coin is actually unitary, at least until it isn't. Now, this talk is not to try and persuade you that all binaries in general are socially constructed and kind of false. This talk is to persuade you that all astronomical binaries are socially constructed and kind of false. So let's talk about what a binary is in astronomy. It's 2 stars. And immediately, that is really not the same definition as anywhere else in life. To the slight credit of the astronomers, this all comes from the root Greek word for a pair, and it's a valid, different way to look at something as a pair. But it's not even 2 stars. I will show plenty of examples where something I think is worth calling a binary, but it's not. One or both of them stars. Here's a nice little image. Here again is the Wiktionary definition. Basically 2 stars. I'm going to give a more general definition, which is still going to break down, but we'll at least get further with it, which is that it's 2 gravitating objects bound by their shared gravitational well. So in an example like this, it's quite obvious that this is 2 things bound together, but there's also plenty of examples that look more like this, where there's tons of objects. And the nice thing about this definition is that a pair like these 2, which are clearly bound to each other, can also be bound to other systems, and the definition still holds. And obviously, everything in the galaxy is bound to the galaxy. Nothing is in isolation. A theme that will return. So, how do we look for binaries? We can look for things that are resolvable or unresolvable. And I've split this into a general binary. And as such, it will collapse. But we'll get there. Resolvable binaries, one of the most wonderful examples of this is in the tail of the planet. There are these 2 stars, Alpha and Mizar. You can see them, hopefully you can see them on this slide, but you can also see them with the naked eye. It's an old folk tale that when you stop being able to see them, think it's, I'm going to say generously 20 years until you go blind. There's a lot of debate about whether these are actually binaries. There are probably some people in the audience who have a strong opinion, one way or the other, including me. You can ask me about it at the end. A lot of this talk is based on the science insight given to us by the Gaia telescope. This is my little sketch of the Gaia telescope. It's a satellite up in space. It's spinning around, looking at the whole sky, and measuring the positions of every star it sees, and building this huge catalogue of stars, the biggest we've ever had. And so people went looking for resolvable binaries in these. The only line you need to worry about here is the red line. This is the number of binaries they found as a function of their separation, so how wide the orbit is. And if you're very quick in your head on Kepler's third law, this, I prefer thinking about these in periods. This is about 1,000 years, this is about 30,000 years. So they're finding these big wide binaries. They looked at the Gaia catalogue, which is billions of stars. They found about 1 million binaries. So that suggests like 0.1% of things are binaries. So now let me just introduce you to what binaries look like in general. There's quite a lot going on here, but let's start with just the blue points in this plot. This is the chance of a star having a companion as a function of stellar mass. And already by about a solar mass, 50% of systems are binaries. That goes up to probably about 100% as things get more massive. And remembering that more massive stars are brighter and therefore more visible, more than half of the stars we can see are binaries. So there's this huge disconnect between the number found of resolvable binaries and the binaries we've actually found that are resolvable, the binaries that we know are there. Part of that is explained by this plot on the right, which is the distribution of periods. This is in days. I prefer to think about this in years, and in years this peak is about 100 years. So there's a big range of periods, but they go all the way down to 1 year would be about here, but there are binaries on day-long periods. And they also go up to huge numbers, millions of years. I didn't check that, should check that. But we get a little bit of a view from here of why there weren't that many binaries, because all of the resolvable binaries would be sitting at this end. But even so, there's still tons missing that there's no way to make that 0.1% and that 50% match up. So maybe all the other binaries are, well, it works for a little bit. Thanks. Are unresolvable. You're going to have to be doing that a lot, but we can work it out. So here is just a little sketch of a binary. Let's not worry about what the crosses are for the moment, but we have 2 stars. And this is a kind of perfect situation, but as that same system becomes further away, as we become just less able to resolve it, limited by the fundamental resolvability of our telescope, these 2 things will basically start to overlap to the point where you can't possibly pick them apart. And what you'll actually see is something like this. Oh, one to me.
Are we both doing it?
Yeah, I think now we're both doing it. Basically, something combined at one combined source with the properties of them both. Now, there's a bunch of ways to look for binaries: astrometric, spectroscopic, photometric. I spent my PhD worrying about astrometric, so that's what I'm going to tell you about tonight. These are interesting. You could ask me about them at the end, but I'm going to kind of fly past them. So what does it mean when we're looking for astrometric binaries? Well, going back to this image, now let's worry about these crosses. This black cross is the center of mass of this system. So everything kind of moves around the center of mass. The center of mass moves like its own single mass. This yellow cross is the center of light. And the center of mass, its position depends on the ratio of the masses of the 2 binaries. Center of light, its position depends on the ratio of luminosities or fluxes of the 2 binaries. And there's no reason in general that those 2 should be the same number. And so there's no reason in general why the center of light should overlap with the center of mass. So as the binary, or as this unresolved combined source orbits, as these 2 literally just make their way around their center of mass, the center of light moves around the center of mass, and that adds an extra component of motion to the motion of the star. So here are a bunch of astrometric binary tracks, and I want you to get you to start thinking about which of these do you think are short period, which of these do you think are long period binaries. I'm going to explain a little bit more about why the tracks look like this first, though. There's two components which are present in every single star's track, whether or not it's binary. One is the motion of the Earth, which we see as parallax motion. Basically, do you want to set this movie going? Yes, there we go. Basically, nearby stars, as we move around our orbit, we change our perspective on them. Distant stars are so far away that we can barely see that change. This is actually if the Earth's orbit was 500 times larger. You can see that a star like this one is nearby. There's one that flies across the top that must be very near. And we're looking at Orion, and all of the stars in Orion itself are quite distant and barely moving. So that's this kind of looping motion that we can see quite clearly in this track and this track. But there's also just the motion of the stars across the sky. Like everything in the sky is moving. So the kind of green spider web we're seeing going around is just the south pole of the Earth precessing. But you can see that there's lots of stars working their way across the sky. Sirius particularly, one of our brightest stars, will just go to the south pole. Well, actually, it will go across the southern sky, but the actual pole is moving much faster than it's moving. This is in years, so this is the kind of scale over which the sky changes. It's long, but it's not that long. And so that's just like a linear contribution, and between the two of them, you get tracks that look a bit like this. You can see the loop of parallax and the linear motion. This is over 3 years, that's the length of Gaia so far. That's why they look like this. So, all the extra motion, all the extra complication is the binary added on top. So this is the different periods. This is 1 year. You can see that it's almost happening, like, it's not perfectly 1 year, but like, the extra variation is almost at the same rate as the parallax. These are really short. You can actually probably persuade yourself that there's 36 little deviations per loop here. These ones I love. Like, the binary is really kind of fighting against the parallax, and you get kind of a signature squiggle that's completely indecipherable to most telescopes. And then, at really long periods, you actually get something that looks a lot like a single star again. And the reason for that is that you're only seeing a tiny fraction of the orbit over 3 years you're looking at. And a tiny fraction of an orbit looks basically like a straight line. And so really long period things go back to being kind of invisible. Alright, so we have a method to find binaries. Now, can we find binaries and are they real? First we can ask, is it a binary if it moves like this? By definition of two stars, actually we don't know. This is a purely gravitational effect. Like, we know that there is one bright star because we're seeing the light from it, but it could be anything as the other mass. All we know is that there's another significant mass there. So we could ask, is it a star if it's massive? You can probably guess the answer to this if you like coming to these talks. There's tons of things in the sky that are massive but not stars, like white dwarfs, neutron stars, black holes. All of these, I think, would count as a binary in some ways. Like, they're causing the same effect, but they're not stars. And equally, is it not a star if it's not massive? Oops, there we went too far. This is a plot I really love. This is just the masses and radiuses of planets and asteroids and stars. And the thing that's wonderful about this is that though they change behavior, they change kind of scaling law, they're actually continuous. Like, a star and a brown dwarf look almost exactly the same. There's just a kind of transition between the scaling relations at certain points. And you can ask me about these transitions later. In fact, you can ask me anything about transition later. So can we at least say it's not a binary if it doesn't move like this? Absolutely not. So we already saw that this system of 30 years is already starting to not look like a binary anymore. All I want you to focus on here is the yellow line. This is, as a function of the period, how likely are we to detect these as binaries? And when the period is long, we've got no chance because it just looks linear. When the period is short, the orbit's just too small, and you can see down here it's already starting to disappear. So we have this kind of window of binaries we can see. And already, like, it's going to zero at that 100-year most common binaries. So we're still missing a huge fraction of these. Just because we don't see any of this motion definitely doesn't mean there isn't a star there, or another mass. So I said earlier that resolvable stars catch about 0.1% of all binaries. This number hopefully will add up to 50%. We did this exercise with the Gaia catalogue. We pulled out the thing that had like clear extra noise, and we find loads of binaries, but it's still only about 10% of the catalogue. This is stars within 100 parsecs, so like our nearest stars. We're still only able to find like 10%, when we know that this number should be much, much higher. And still the reason for that is this period curve. Like, we lose our sensitivity 100 years just where the most common stars are. The vast majority of stars are not findable by any method we have. We just can't find those binaries. So finally, is it a binary if it's binary? We've picked a star, we've seen evidence that we think it's a binary. Is it safe to say it's a binary? Absolutely not. So we're going to go back to this plot now and look at the red points. This is the number of companions. And if every multiple star was a binary, the red points and the blue points would be exactly the same. But, as we'll hear about in the next talk, plenty of stars are triples or quadruples. Some of them are even sevens. 7 is the highest we've found, but we should probably expect that number basically not to have a limit if you look at math stars. And there's no way, if we see a binary, to know that it doesn't have another period going on at a different, doesn't have another orbit going on at a different period, it doesn't have like 100-year periods that we just can't resolve on top of the like 5-year period we do see. But actually, even this is actually not really the number and mass of companions, but again, the number and chance of massive companions. These are only things that are stars, because actually, this isn't what stellar systems look like. I showed you an image earlier. Oh wait, getting out of my own order. Because actually, real astronomical systems have a 100% chance of having a companion. There's absolutely no chance of a naked mass. There's always more mass there. At the same time, the number of companions always effectively infinite. Because stellar systems, I showed you a picture earlier, we looked at the 2 stars, but all this stuff is here. There's always more mass. I actually think that it's completely wrong-headed exercise to ask if something's a binary. We should always just be asking what's the mass of the next mass. There are no naked masses anywhere in the sky. Just by the nature of gravity, they will always attract more things in. So to finish up, if this clicker, which we've been collaborating throughout, but we're just about getting there. Binarity in astronomy is not the same definition and doesn't even fit within the definition of binarity in general. Binaries really can only exist in like clean yes or no if you stick to the quite arbitrary classification of whether or not something is a star. And plenty of things that are gravitationally significant for the evolution of stellar systems, don't fall under that classification, but absolutely fall under most of the effects that we call binary. And that was my last one. The vast majority of binaries we can never know, and even if we do find what looks like a binary, we can kind of never know that it isn't a triple. So hopefully this has kind of shaken to the core any belief you have that binaries are really real and it's worth going to look for them. But at the same time, there's been a kind of undercurrent of this talk, and it's my final bit of the conclusions, which is just that gender isn't real, and that if you're trans, you can double jump. Thank you so much for listening, and to let us know any questions.
How do you expect the probability of detection of objects with companions, shall we say, to change as we get more Gaia data? Is that something that's going to keep shifting, or just having 1 or 2 extra years worth of data not really help?
This is a really good question. I'm just going back to this. I actually have nicely. I went too far back. I actually have nicely a visual example of this. This dotted line here is with Gaia DR2. So this is 2 years of data. Gaia DR3 is 3 years of data. And we can see the change. It's a little increase at the low period end, because at the low period end we're increasing our signal to noise, but nothing else is really changing. We're just we have a better chance of resolving those small binaries. At the high period end, though, is where you get a really big shift, and especially because we know that most binaries are out here. That's why actually the number of binaries we know is going to fly up as there are more Gaia data releases. And that's just because the ones that look like this, if you put another loop on it, it would already start to have a curve that you can see. And this actually is something really sad that like Gaia is planned to last until 2025. We'll have about 8 years of data then, and then we won't have a satellite until probably the 2040s, the 2050s. There is not a follow-up, and we just won't be seeing them. Like just when we would be starting to resolve that 100-year period, the satellite will run out of propellant, and we don't have a replacement until lots of us are quite old.
Any other questions?
You promised to tell a bit more about two other methods that you mentioned there. One was astrometry, I believe, the one...
So astrometry, the one I've been talking about,
yes.
I think it's back.
Yeah,
it's back.
It should be way back, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm just going to say them. I'll keep working on that as I go. The other two are spectroscopy and photometry. Spectroscopy is looking at the spectra of the stars, and there's two different ways you can find a binary of that. You can see absorption lines, which correspond to particular chemical, like bending and stretching, harmonics, like these here, and you see them shift over the period of the binary from the star. This is the same as the radial velocity method. It would be fair to call it radial velocity for finding planets. This really likes short periods because it likes the biggest velocities you can get. So actually, doesn't really help for the binaries that you'll find in astrometry, but finds you even shorter period ones. So we actually can find basically everything up to the period at which Gaia shuts off. You can also sometimes tell from the absorption lines that there's two stars, even if they're not moving, because you could be like, this profile looks like one star, this profile looks like another star. The other one is photometry, literally just some version of like looking at, there's extra light there. Like if there are two binaries, it says now, right back at the end of the talk, I'm not going to try and get to it. Yeah, actually that'd be fab. If you want to go to the slide after the last slide, there's a secret final slide. You can just tell that there's more light there, so there must be more stars. This requires you knowing things like the distance, which is actually hard with a binary because the binary is moving, and therefore it's actually hard to measure the parallax of these because there's a bunch of other stuff going on. I thought you were going to have like a really quick method, but no. I thank you. Oh no. Yes, here we go. So these are all the binaries we found, and particularly this is the actual binary fraction. This is basically blankness. You can see that above the kind of main spine where most stars live, there's this region. Am I allowed to touch the screen? No. There's this region where the binary fraction is really high, and that's because they're literally just brighter. There's two stars there, so they get brighter. But that only works if they're sort of similarly bright. Lots of binaries are like 1/1000th the brightness of each other, but still gravitationally significant. And so neither of those methods. Astrometry will probably find us more binaries in the short term, arguably already, than either of those methods have. But they both definitely work.
And just a clarification, and I thought binary refers to stars, and so at the end of the presentation you say like there is always more mass, so whatever, even if it's not a star, counting the binary system or...
Yes, this is kind of the question of like, if we restrict binaries to just meaning stars, we lose a bunch of things which are doing exactly what are important for physics. So like, when there is something orbiting you, causing massive perturbation, it changes your physics. But it only counts as binary by the classical definition if it's a star. The method I'm describing, astrometry, has no idea if it's a star or not because it just requires a mass. It's just a gravitational effect. In fact, it's even a slightly smaller effect if it's another star. It's best when the other mass is really not bright. It's a really good method for finding black holes, and we actually recently found the first nearby black hole in orbit through this, which is a very exciting object. It's like a 10 solar mass black hole a few hundred parsecs away. Those numbers might not mean that very much, but that's very big and very close. It's not going to scary big, but because like the whole definition of a star is that it's hydrogen fusing, and that is very relevant for some things, but completely irrelevant for other physics, especially the physics which cares about gravity, which just cares about mass. I would say mass is much more the fundamental quantity of any astronomical object, and its ability to produce light. I mean, its ability to produce light is important for observers who want to see it, but actually that's the lovely thing about binaries. You can see dark objects because of their gravitational effect. So yeah, if you're willing to stick with the definition of a binary as only being a star, there's more you can do with it, but there's a bunch of things that are interesting that don't get classed as binaries.
And these graphs, are they like bound to that definition of binary with the star, or are they just more excluded that definition?
No, actually, these, like down here, these are all white dwarfs. So these actually, that sit really nicely, exactly the 0.75 in this stupid magnitude scale you expect. These are binary white dwarfs. So these are just things that are bright enough to be in diet.
Yeah.
These are probably, some of these are just erroneous. That's one reason they end up here, but the other reason is that they're a white dwarf and an sequence star. So again, that wouldn't actually fit the definition of binaries, but as far as I'm concerned, definitely it would fit the definition of an astrometric signal.
One last question, maybe? Okay, then let's start with Zephyr.